I'm Lau Branson, and this is a very brief video on learning communities. In this video, I'm not talking about larger learning organizations, churches, other organizations, although that in itself is an important topic. But I'm talking about smaller learning communities, groups. I'm particularly interested in leaders who covenant together to engage in action reflection as a way to increase their own competencies and make them better leaders of learning in their own organizations. And we're just going to look at a particular set of qualities or elements that help these organizations or these learning communities work well. First of all, some basics. You need to show up. That if a learning community has people who are constantly in and out, not always there, not always able to listen and reflect, then it's simply not going to work. So the covenant for being with this group needs to be a priority for these men and women. And that has to do with the motivation. Why are they there? Are they motivated? Do they have a desire for this kind of learning? Often there may not be a desire because to do this kind of learning, you need to constantly be checking your own assumptions and putting a lot on the table. There may be anxieties that get in the way of participating, or simply being very busy with all of the managerial stuff of leadership. And so this kind of engagement that is more difficult, though much more promising, may in fact not be the easiest to be motivated. But everyone in the group will need to be motivated, have a desire for this, and will need just to put their bodies and their brains and their feelings into showing up. The time together is spent listening and questioning. A learning community can't work unless there is deep listening to the words of each other, listening to what's behind the words, and using questions more than statements. This isn't about commentary on each other, but asking questions to continue to clarify causes and effects, consequences, potential new imagination. So listening and questioning are key elements for how a learning community can work. And so this happens in reflection and conversation. Reflection means that you are thinking about the experiences that you're bringing and putting on the table. You are doing that in light of scripture, in light of theology. You're making connections about causes, about cultural issues. But the reflection is both what's going on inside you, but also conversation is a way that we reflect collaboratively. It's a way that we are able to check assumptions and do this kind of critical work together. And frequently we've learned that there is a huge benefit when there's a coach involved. Not a coach, not somebody to provide answers, not a teacher, not somebody who's the expert who's going to give you some set of answers for what you're facing, but a coach that helps you be a better reflective group. A coach that helps point out some of the barriers that may be getting in the way of learning. A coach that can propose some experiments that can continue to increase your capacities. So being involved in personal reflection and conversation reflection, but getting a coach that can help you do that together as a group. Two other elements that are critical. One is alterity, simply meaning the other. The people in the group are different. And so they not only want to be there to get their own beliefs and practices affirmed, but to actually, in the life of each other and in the words of each other, see something different. See that if they look at this situation through somebody else's eyes, that will in fact increase their wisdom, increase their competencies. But not just other in the group. The group needs to be engaged with persons outside the group and even outside their organizations, with neighbors, in civic settings, being able to be in conversations and life together beyond their own group, because that alterity matters for the learning of the group. So the other is important for the learning community, but also revealing. I need to be able to be expressive of the thinking, feeling, experiences that I bring to put on the table. That's subjective. It's simply naming my own life and where I am. And I need to be able to be revealing enough of that to be able to get at the kind of competencies and change and learning that we want. The assumption is always that we don't know things we need to know, that in fact we practice things that are not helpful practices, that our assumptions are wrong. All of these things can only get worked on in the midst of both alterity and self-revelation. And so it's happening in an action reflection mode that can help learning and discerning take place. So by action reflection, the group itself is engaged weekly regularly in activities of leadership, in civic life, with neighbors, with family. And so those activities then are getting reflection, depending on what it is that the group is working on. But it's this rhythm of action and reflection that makes learning possible. And so the learning then is a matter of both learning and discerning. And the discerning is about God's agency. It's a matter of the commitment of the group to discern what God's up to in their lives, in their organizations, in their context, among their neighbors, in their society, in their cultures. What's God doing, and how do we learn from that? How do we participate with what God is doing? So that's the learning, discerning element that happens in an action reflection sequence. So those are basic elements for a learning organization. There are many other things that are important, but notice the theological issues around not only God's agency, but motivation comes from faith, hope, and love. Reflection and conversation come out of love and the deep respect for each other. Action reflection is the constant mode about how God's people are learning throughout Scripture. It's obvious how often Jesus is using questions to prompt learning, and he listens well enough, as do Paul and Peter at times, so that they're able to learn from others what God is doing around them, because without that, they wouldn't know. They wouldn't be able to perceive what it is that God's up to. And so all of these elements are important. Reflect on them theologically, look at them in your own learning communities, and see if there are ways to enhance what your group is doing.